Hi there. Welcome to part 20 of my series going over every piece of music in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. 9 episodes later, and we are finally at the end of Chapter 4. Wow, can you believe it? Oh, and just a heads up, this episode is so long that I've decided to spin off the Midgar Mysteries finale onto its own video. That's right, head to toe, this episode is just pure music analysis. The Midgar Mysteries finale should be up in a week or so, but for now, sit back, grab your popcorn, grab your boiled corn, grab your corn dog, grab whatever you got, because it's time to finally finish Chapter 4. Let's jump in. As Cloud and the loyal 7th Infantry fight their way towards the port, we eventually arrive at a domed arena. Soldier 2nd Class Roche has been jonesing for a rematch with his very good friend since our first encounter in Remake Chapter 4, and it is finally time. Buckle up for one of Rebirth's best tracks. This is Ra Ra Roche, and it was composed by Mitsuto Suzuki and arranged by Suzuki and Miki Hirose. This Suzuki composition credit also confirms he composed the Roche track from Part 14, where Roche's new theme was first introduced. If it didn't fully grab you back then, this version is likelier to do so. The track opens with the main riff on trumpet and accompanying brass. This is Roche's primary leitmotif, but on first listen, the flurry of notes could be a bit much to take in. After the intro, the track settles into its verse, where the melody is more obvious and easier to digest. It's one hell of a hook, and it's repeated often enough throughout the battle that you are likely to have it lodged inside your brain before long. After the intro but before the verse starts, we get bassy brass driving this fairly rocking chord progression. This stripped-down 4-chord groove was also first introduced in the Part 14 track. Which is why I think this section is another fundamental part of his theme, and not just a fun, non-thematic jazzy embellishment, of which this track is full of. And speaking of jazzy embellishments, it's time to introduce Ra Ra Roche's co-arranger. Miki Hirose is a Japanese trumpet player, composer, and arranger of, you guessed it, jazz, baby. And guess what? He rules. That's him you're hearing absolutely letting it rip on the trumpet throughout this track. Damn, that's good. And it shouldn't be too surprising if you take a listen to his own work. Hirose doesn't seem to have any prior association with video game scoring, working instead in the jazz scene both in Tokyo and before that in New York City for a solid decade. If, like me, Ra Ra Roche is one of your favorite tracks in Rebirth, I encourage you to check out Hirose's own albums, which sound a lot like Ra Ra Roche if Ra Ra Roche was about 15% slower and 40% less manic. Another reason it sounds so much like Ra Ra Roche is that Miki Hirose's own band, Miki Hirose Jazz Orchestra, are largely the musicians playing on said track. Rebirth's liner notes credit various musicians, but it doesn't break it down on a per-track basis. However, several of Hirosei's bandmates are credited in the Rebirth soundtrack, so I think it's a fair assumption to make that they are at least playing on this track here. Another likely spot some of the Miki Hirose Jazz Orchestra members are playing on is in a slew of jazzy tracks coming up in Chapter 5, but we'll get to those soon enough. So clearly Hirose's influence and input on this track is absolutely massive, but I'm very curious what Mitsuto Suzuki's involvement was from an arrangement standpoint. It doesn't sound much like the slew of Suzuki tracks we've covered in Rebirth so far, although his work on the Runaround from the Yuffie DLC proved he had the jazz chops. But still, this just sounds like Hirose and is played by Hirose and his pals. So my theory is Suzuki's involvement, beyond writing the original theme, is more technical than musical. Miki Hirose's expertise lies in a more traditional jazz world, so I wouldn't expect him to know how to make a piece of music with player-controlled triggers. Since this track is used in a boss battle that employs several dynamic music cues, I expect Suzuki gave Hirose and his band general direction to let loose and record a couple different variations of Ra Ra Roche, and then those takes and stems were passed on to Mitsuto Suzuki, who in turn transformed it into more discrete, dynamic music cues. In this theory, the labor division between Suzuki and Hirose is more akin to a record producer and the artist, with each one having their own separate but essential role. I could be wrong, but that makes sense to me. And speaking of dynamic triggers, we've got a few to go over. The first happens once you've taken off about half of Roche's health bar. This triggers a cutscene and a new music cue. Hirose and his trumpet take a breather, leaving us with drums, a double bass, and some occasional lower brass, like maybe a trombone. Taking the trumpet out here is the right call, since otherwise it'd be hard to make out Roche's little mid-battle speech. But having the trumpet dip out here felt really jarring to me at first, like, whoa, this feels a bit hollow. But then I remembered that I've deliberately turned off the voices so that I can better hear the music. But that's not how the music was meant to be heard. It's not hollow, it's just easing off the gas for Roche himself to step in. So this is all just a long-winded note to self that I shouldn't just listen to these tracks in a dialogue-free vacuum, and that the sound effects and voice acting are, obviously, part of the game's full sound experience. For example, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but in the Japanese version, at the beginning of the track, Roche's laugh lines up really well with the brass melody. Whether or not that was intentional, that's an awesome little touch, but it doesn't line up at all in the English version. So maybe it was just a happy coincidence. Anyhow, following the cutscene, the track returns to its main arrangement, which has a luxurious, nearly 3-minute long loop. Upon landing the finishing blow, we get another cutscene with a unique music trigger for the dramatic finale. So awesome. But for the original soundtrack listeners out there, did you notice how different that outro was? The OST version has that lonely trumpet at the end that I really love. That solo trumpet sounds so sad. It really conveys Roche's possibly broken heart over the loss of his crimson hog. My guess is that the OST version is how Hirose ended the track, but Suzuki, or one of the cutscene directors, decided it was a bit too delicate or melancholy for the tone of the cutscene, so they went for something more bombastic in the final take. What a track. Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorites in Rebirth. Following the battle, Roche concedes his defeat and allows you to continue your shipward escape. Just as soon, our next track starts up. The piece starts with the virtual strings playing the bass line riff from Roche's theme. As Roche and his posse give Cloud a big salute, we get a fun, quick blend of Roche's theme and a triumphant major key variation of the Shinra theme. We've had so many variations of the ascending Shinra A section in Chapter 4, but this is the first inarguably uplifting version. It reminds me most of Yasunori Nishiki's Stewards of the Planet from that Shinra-made Promised Land propaganda video from back in Remake. Interestingly, that one only has Nishiki listed as one of the composers, not Uematsu. While that could be a liner note omission, I expect that's an accurate crediting and that Nishiki has interpolated the theme just enough for it to be a transformative reference. Which makes me curious to see if Uematsu will get a credit on this Roche track once the Plus soundtrack comes out. That thing's still coming out, right? Has anyone checked in at Square to see if they know that that's a thing that they can make? The Plus soundtrack? I'm currently playing through Stellar Blade right now, another game with a god-tier 9-hour plus soundtrack, and guess what? The developer Shift Up just put out that game's plus soundtrack last week. They just did it. They bundled the tracks that didn't make it onto the original soundtrack together, slapped a plus on there, and hit publish. Easy. Square, get on it. Anyhow, following the triumphant salute, the track gets a bit more melancholic. This is potentially our last goodbye with Cloud's biggest fan, and the music evokes that tinge of sadness, however one-sided it might be. These are not very convincing sounding strings, but having them paired with that reverby synth gives the track a pretty distinctive 80s cinematic feel. And that feels plenty appropriate to me, considering this wild roller dome-ass battle arena we're in right now. Following the cutscene, the track loops and we continue our way toward the ship. Having said our goodbye to Roche, it's now time to say goodbye to the sweetest infantry unit in all of Shinra. Upon setting foot on the elevator, Cloud realizes his men have stopped. This is the end of the line for us and them, and the accompanying track sets the scene perfectly. A gentle piano and some brass set the stage. Which is very appropriate, considering what we went through with the 7th Infantry. But you want to know what I heard when I first heard this track? Before anything else, I thought they were going for Hamauzu's Avalanche theme. Yeah, it's different enough, and obviously my hopes were dashed away by the time the melody actually got to its endpoint, but for a brief moment, yeah man, it made me think of Jesse and Wedge and Biggs, friends and comrades lost in this terrible fight against Shinra. Anyway, it's not Avalanche, but coincidence or not, it certainly added some extra weight and parallels to some of Remake's most heart-wrenching scenes. Next, the track brings in delicate strings as it shifts into a brief, very lovely piano arrangement of Shinra's full-scale assault. There's also some nice little string plucks on the double bass here. This scene does a remarkable job showing the very human side of our big imperialistic enemies, and a lot of it lands thanks to the music. Next, we get the trumpet and a lone marching drum snare, hinting at the Shinra A section. Just like in the last track, we get another creative, uplifting twist on the Shinra A section. Out of context, you really wouldn't know this is one of the game's main bad guy themes. Beautifully creative arrangement. Just like our goodbye with Roche, once the cutscene ends, the track repeats and more or less loops. Oh, and don't even try giving them one last goodbye hug. The game won't let you. I know I'm not the only one who tried to go back. Once Cloud activates the elevator down, the music fades out, leaving you alone with your tears. Upon reaching ground level, you finally reunite with your party. The ensuing cutscene is pretty short, so let's listen to the accompanying half-minute track uninterrupted. The next track starts right after the cutscene, but we'll talk about that one later. For now, let's go back to the beginning because, I don't know, there's something funny in this one. Okay, the first thing I want to point out is the very first thing you hear. Like the very first piano note. Actually, the very beginning of the very first piano note. Is it just me, or does it seem like the note's attack is sort of clipped off? Okay, let me explain what I mean by attack first. In music production, we can often break down the contour or envelope of a sound into a 4-part sequence. Those sequences are referred to as ADSR: attack, decay, sustain, release. And it basically describes the life cycle of a sound. For example, if you look at one piano note, we can map that sound onto an ADSR timeline. The attack is the initial rising part of the sound. In the case of the piano, it's the initial impact of the tiny little hammers inside the piano hitting its strings. The attack is everything up to and including its peak. The next 3 phases quantify, among other things, the different stages at which the sound attenuates. But for today, all you need to know about is the attack. Anyway, in this track, does it feel to you like the beginning of the attack is missing? Because that's what it feels like to me. Actually, now that I've listened to this a few times, I don't think the attack is clipped. I think the attack is fine. You can, hang on, you can actually see it right there. Right. Where's my finger? See, that's a pretty clean attack. It's a bit rough, but that's fine. That's just a piano. But I'm keeping this extended ADSR lesson sequence because I think the point I'm about to get to is still relevant because the track does feel a bit has a bit of an abrupt start, but back to me. Okay, take it away. Which gives the note and the track itself a sort of abrupt beginning. As for why we're missing the attack, it could just be a super minor exporting oversight, but I think it actually hints to a past life this track might have once had. One of the places where you might hear this sort of clipped attack is in looping music. Sometimes you have to clip off the beginning of a note if the note happened to have started ever so slightly before the bar. This is so that once the track gets to its loop point, it seamlessly jumps back to the beginning of a bar, not a few milliseconds before or after, the very beginning. Often, the attack of the beginning of the loop is actually placed at the very end of the loop to make the loop feel seamless. Let's take a look at the original Let the Battles Begin loop as an example. From the beginning, the percussion, brass, and strings all start very cleanly and come in together on the first bar. This is obviously the beginning of the track, but while you might think that once the track reaches the end of its loop point, it would jump back to this intro, this isn't where the track loops back to. The very beginning of the track is a unique intro that only plays once and never again, since if you were to try to loop back to the track's start, the transition would be a bit inelegant. We've got a few new flute lines playing during the climax, and the lead trumpet is building up to one last note. But if you loop back to the very beginning of the track, where there are no flutes and no trumpet resolution, it would sound like something's missing. So instead, Let the Battles Begin has a discrete loop point further into the track. It looks to me like the loop start point is actually at around the 1 minute mark. This is the point that, whenever the track reaches its end, it loops back to, not the track's intro. Now let's hear what it sounds like when you loop your track. Yeah, a perfect loop. It's a bit of an Ouroboros situation, where if you entangle the snake, i.e. the looping audio, sorry, is this metaphor making any sense? You can get a piece of music with a harsh beginning and a harsh end that never sounds right unless it's looping, in which case it sounds endless. This is all to say, to me, the beginning of this track doesn't sound like the actual beginning of this track. It feels like the continuation of something. Of what? I'm not sure. But if we compare the start of this track to our 7th Infantry farewell music, we'll find a pretty similar piano and strings arrangement, along with just about the same key. But in-game, these two tracks don't meet. There's a big 30-40 second silent gap as we head down the elevator and meet our pals. It could be that the 7th Infantry music initially didn't fade out as quickly, but instead accompanied you until you triggered the cutscene below. That could have been a pretty elegant track transition, akin to the one we covered at the very end of Chapter 2 when we first entered Mithril Mine. Like that Mithril Mine transition, they would probably need a masking layer to help blend the two tracks, since the game can't account for where you are in the 7th Infantry track when you first approach the cutscene. But the cutscene is looking for a very specific piano cue, so maybe they just decided that this handoff was a bit too complicated to implement. Hence, we are left with a pretty long gap without music, by Rebirth standards at least, followed by essentially a track transition that's missing its beginning. It would also explain why the track then dramatically shifts keys a few seconds later. To me, that second chord feels like the track's actual start. The piano part right before just feels like an odd holdover from an earlier iteration of the scene. That's my theory, anyway. As always, I could be way off base. But if I'm even 20% right on this, then it means this is likely a Shima track, since he's the king when it comes to these super ambitious track transitions. Okay, now that we've covered the first note of this track, let's look at the rest of the notes, shall we? I'm really intrigued by the melody that plays right after. That's not an existing FF7 motif, is it? Because it sounds new to me and quite lovely. Actually, you know what it reminds me of? That track from when the party reunited at the end of Mithril Mine. Yeah, the melodies themselves are fairly different, but we are looking at two likely Shima-composed new flute melodies that narratively serve the exact same purpose: relief as the party reunites at the end of a chapter.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Even if musically it's a bit of a stretch. If we come across at least one more end-of-chapter party reunion track with a unique flute melody, then I think we'd have a trend. Right after that section, we get a slightly more mysterious counter-melody line on a clarinet and bassoon. At least I think it's a bassoon. It's so Shima sounding. Very nice. The track then resolves ominously, with the strings sustaining a bit longer than usual to help mask the transition to the next track, which starts right as the cutscene ends. I quite like this one. It has a pleasing, contemplative feel and is full of little unique one-off musical ideas. I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but the Plus soundtrack is still not out, so we don't know for sure who wrote this track, but I'm once again betting this is Shima. The most obvious clue is that the bassoon-rich prior track sounded a lot like Shima to me, and this sort of near-seamless track transition, as I pointed out a literal half-year ago at the beginning of this chapter, is usually the sign of a single arranger working on the tracks, as opposed to a handoff between arrangers. So if the last one is Shima, this one probably is as well. But beyond that, there are a few other, less ironclad clues pointing to Shima, such as the sparse, accented notes of a clean, echoey electric guitar, which is something he used on a lot of Chapter 1 tracks. Unlike the Chapter 1 Shima tracks, however, the guitar here sounds like a virtual instrument, which again tracks with all of these end of Chapter 4 Shima-sounding pieces. It's not all that surprising that the music you would hear at the very, very beginning of the game, and especially in the pre-release demo, would have more budget for reorchestration, versus a few tracks relegated to short cutscenes a quarter of the way through the game. Like, until I replayed this section for the purpose of capturing footage for this video, I had zero memory of this track, the last track, nor the next one. So skipping the live orchestration for these ones is very excusable, and would explain the sound discrepancy between these and your typical Shima tracks, assuming it's him, or whoever it is. But while most of this track sounds like a new composition altogether, I'm getting very faint whiffs of anxiety in this one. The track anxiety, not my own headspace. Like, listen to this. Yeah, these are big stretches, but are they unrealistic stretches? Like me hearing the Whispers theme inside the end of the Elena boss fight? Or are they totally believable stretches? Like the cleverly hidden Fort Condor theme back in part 12 and 13? Let me know in the comments below. Ideally while using the super thanks button so that it softens the blow to my ego when it turns out I'm dead wrong about this one. Anyway, if those are deliberate nods to anxiety, that's awesome. If not, it's still a very cool track. Like a surprisingly detailed and long track, considering it only ever plays for the duration of you walking from the side of the ship to the back of the ship.
Here we go!
What? That's like 40 steps. That's even shorter than the already short party reunion cutscene that preceded it. Why would they create a nearly 2-minute long loop full of cool new musical ideas within one of the shorter sequences of uninterrupted gameplay in all of Rebirth? That's crazy, and probably gives credence to what I said earlier about the track with the clipped attack intro being a sign that this pre-boarding ship sequence might have initially been more involved than what we got in the final game. I refuse to believe someone signed off on a 2-minute long track for such a brief, inconsequential gameplay sequence. We have to be missing a piece of the picture here. But obviously I'm not complaining. Things get cut all the time. Still, it's fun to speculate as to what happened. Back in Remake, there was a chapter planned where you got to play as Tifa as she infiltrated Wall Market, but it had to be cut for development reasons. I wonder if a similar non-Cloud gameplay sequence was originally planned for around this point in Rebirth as well. We don't really know how Barrett, Red, Tifa, and Aerith, not to mention Yuffie, made their way down to the ship, and I wonder if that cutscene of everyone meeting was initially supposed to be from one of their perspectives. Who knows? All right, we are finally at the last track of Chapter 4. As Cloud crosses the bridge onto the Shinra 8, the track immediately cuts in. I love how dramatically the music cuts to this deep, bassy synth right as Captain Titov turns toward the camera. Like the game really isn't hiding that he's a bit of a scummy dude. We then get ominous, low strings playing a simple riff, followed by all the strings coming together. This track feels ripe for Uematsu references, but I'll tell you right now, I didn't find anything super concrete. There are a few debatable, fragmented motifs which may or may not be intentional, so I'll call those out as we get to them. But overall, there are so many little melodic ideas here that feel like references, but I can't tell if they're actually from anything pre-existing or not. One of the core reasons why this voyage is so ominous is because of the massive alien stowed in the hull of the ship, Jenova. Therefore, I kind of had my ears tuned for Jenova references within this moody track. As a result, the 3 ascending notes at this point here made me think of the beginning of Jenova's verse motif. Rightfully or not, I actually pointed out this same 3-note pattern in the very first episode of this series. Wow! Take it away, younger, less cocky version of me. Ostinato strings eventually kick in as the cellos and bass play a 3-note ascending melody that is somewhat evocative of a part of Jenova's theme. This is likely a stretch, but Remake did make use of this piecemeal part of the Jenova theme as well from time to time. So, maybe? Also, the strings riff here reminded me of the first part of the Jenova bass line. that something? I don't know, there's probably some confirmation bias there, but maybe? Narratively, it would make sense. If I was writing a short tune to foreshadow the ominous Chapter 5 events, I sure as heck would put some Jenova nods in there. Next, the track swells, leading to its first resolution. Next, Captain Titov tells Barrett to get back to work and that they have to stow away their dog, although I thought he was a cat. While this happens, we get more lighthearted bass string plucks. Which, again, feels like the kind of spot they would throw a character reference in, for example, Red or Barrett's theme, but if so, it's gone over my head. A reference to the classic It's Hard to Stand on Both Feet would also have been a fun bit of foreshadowing here, but I don't hear that either. Next, the track reaches its third and final section. As the party begins to board, we get momentous strings and brass. Once again, likely just confirmation bias, but the 3-note couplets here remind me of the opening 6 notes of Jenova's verse melody. Afterward, the track concludes with a solo nylon string guitar. The choice of instrument here is likely due to the incoming massive tone shift we are in for. Things are about to get a lot more relaxed, a lot more seaside. But once again, the guitar's melody feels like an FF7 reference without actually being one, right? But what do you think? Did you spot anything I missed in the last couple tracks? I'm kind of hoping you did, because as much as I enjoyed them, something feels, I don't know, I sense I'm missing something. And just like that, we are done Chapter 4. Holy smokes, that was one long chapter. By my count, Chapter 4 had about 66 tracks, with the majority of those being new compositions for Rebirth. That's a lot of music. For the composer tier folks on my Patreon, I've updated the downloadable spreadsheet with my Chapter 4 findings. You can find all my best guesses for composer and arranger credits, all of the leitmotif references I mentioned in the videos, along with my general notes on each track. Speaking of Patreon, thank you again to all my patrons who have shown a lot of enthusiasm, specifically for this Rebirth series. I'm extremely grateful for your help, and it's because of you, along with all the very encouraging comments on YouTube and Bilibili, that I've remained so dedicated to this series. I'd like to find ways to further involve this super engaged community into this series, and one of the ideas I landed on was some sort of community voting to highlight everyone's favorite tracks. I'll make a post on Patreon, YouTube, and Bilibili in the lead up to Chapter 5 with more info, so stay tuned. Speaking of staying tuned, the Midgar Mysteries finale, like the actual finale, should be up on the channel in the next few weeks. It'll be bundled together with the first 4 parts of the mystery as well, so you can watch it all in one go, or jump straight to the continuation of the cliffhanger at the end of Part 19. A few viewers in the Part 19 comments section rightfully pointed out that the ballooning Midgar Mysteries taking up literally 50% of the last episode was a bit out of hand. You know, once I realized the scope of this thing about 3 episodes back, I probably should have spun it out into its own thing back then. But hey, you live, you learn. So I'm hoping its omission from this already too long episode functions as a bit of a mea culpa. That said, I hope everyone checks out the Midgar Mysteries finale when it comes out. It has a lot of payoff for longtime viewers of this series here. I am very proud of this extremely silly thing I've made, and I think the ending just might shock you. Okay, Chapter 4, done. Thanks again for sticking with me on this unknown journey. See you aboard the Shinra 8 soon. It's the summer months here, so my daughter is out of school, which means I'll have a bit less time to work on these videos until September. But I'm hoping that if I keep the track count per episode low, I should still be able to have a fairly consistent upload schedule. That's the plan at least. Alright, take care. Bye.